Працює медіа.
Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Cheparenko. Today is December 6th, the day of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and we want to congratulate our heroes and thank them for this opportunity to work, to stay in our land, and thank them for protecting our independence and freedom. So let's start our day with the conversation about the financial stability of the citizens of Ukraine. Joining us online is Vasyl Furman, Deputy Chairman of the National Bank of Ukraine Board. Good afternoon, Mr. Vasyl. Good afternoon. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. So, Mr. Vasyl, let's start our conversation with something general. Can you tell us about 3 or maybe 5 factors that the Ukraine financial stability will depend on the next year? Thank you for your question. It's a very broad question. Let me express my personal opinion. For us, incredibly important is, on one hand, victory in the war, but it depends on a lot of factors, and one of such factors that influences it is the foreign financial aid. We want to thank all of our partners for all that aid we're getting, and we know that next year we have a deficit of budget in the amount of $41 billion, and we plan to cover it at the expense of foreign financial aid. The political government of the country works on this situation, and it's very important to have the positive decisions of our key partners like USA, IMF, European Union, and many other countries, because that funding for us, foreign aid, it enables us to maintain the financial front reliably, so to say, without emission by the National Bank of Ukraine, because any unprovisioned emission negatively influences the exchange rate of Ukrainian hryvnia, and thus influences the solvency of every single Ukrainian, including businessmen, business owners, and the government officials. So it's one part of the question. Obviously, the victory is #1 priority, but talking about other aspects, we have to ensure the further growth of our economy, and thanks to the efficient banks of the National Bank of Ukraine and the government, we have financial and macroeconomic stability, stability of the banking system. Economic growth is planned to be at the level of 5%. I would like to remind our spectators and listeners that, for example, during the first quarter, the planned growth was at the level of 1%, so we have quite a good growth trend here. The next year, we expect to observe growth at the level approximately of 4%. Yes, it can be bigger. For example, if there are more currency proceeds coming to a country for recovery, or because, for example, when NBU is making any forecasts, we also take into account risks, the forecasting risks, and 2 forecasting risks for today are the security risk, the end of the war, so the sooner it ends, the better it is for the economy, and the second risk is the uninterrupted nature of foreign financial aid. So the more stable it is, the better it is for Ukrainian economy. In the beginning of the year, the forecast of inflation was around 26%, but according to the October forecast, by the end of the year, the inflation amounts to 6%. So we have a very good trend here too. The next year, it will be a little bit higher than this year, but it will be manifested in 1-digit numbers, in 1-digit indicators. Talking about the reserves of the National Bank of Ukraine, they will be at the good level, and it will serve as a very good financial currency cushion for the stability of the hryvnia rate. So what are the key things for the Ukrainian citizens? The absence of the price growth, absence of inflation, good exchange rate. Again, the economy will grow. We will maintain the currency exchange rate at stable level. And today we see that the banking system is showing some appetite to lending without participation of the government. Well, there are government programs. That's one area of the banking system work. And now we talk about lending without the support by the government. There are more and more banks that are ready to lend, and there are more businessmen who are ready to take those loans. So the lending has grown 10% within the last couple of months, according to the latest surveys. So it plants pretty good expectations in us, in both on the side of the businesses and the banking system. Well, let's proceed to the exchange rates. So what will be the exchange rate by the end of this year, and what are the expectations for the currency exchange rate for the next year? This is something of interest to every Ukrainian. Well, talking about the exchange rate, a little bit more than 2 months ago, the National Bank of Ukraine changed its exchange policy, switching from the fixed rate to guided flexible rate. And now we see that everybody got used to this guided flexibility rate policy. And in November, we've seen improvement on the currency exchange market. So talking about the amounts of agreements entered into in the market, we see that the agreements entered into between the banks of Ukraine, well, this indicator is almost triple comparing to the condition before the year. So the total amount of currency exchange is about $90 million per day. And the official rate fluctuates both ways, reacting to the changes in the currency exchange market. It's normal, and National Bank of Ukraine was emphasizing it multiple times. And so in this segment, situation is quite stable. Hryvnia strengthened 1% from the beginning of November, and the difference between the official and cash rate is approximately 3% now, which is a very good indicator. So generally the situation in the currency exchange market is stable and under control. Yet another change that we've observed in the currency exchange market is lifting the currency restrictions. What does it mean for the banking system and for the citizens? Well, look, with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the National Bank imposed a number of restrictions. Then gradually, as the situation was stabilizing, the National Bank was lifting some of those restrictions, including this currency restriction. We have certain strategy of currency restrictions, and we act in accordance with that strategy. Well, it's clear that one of the steps of this strategy was imposed on the 1st of December. There were 4 blocks of matters that were regulated. So first of all, we cancelled all the restrictions for the bank and the financial institutions for the amount of the sale of cash currency to the population. That would allow minimizing the difference between the official and cash rate. Another block of matters is that the Export Credit Agency was allowed to transfer funds abroad for reimbursement of expenses under insurance and reinsurance agreements. That was done to ensure insurance of risks during the armed aggression of Russian Federation, to guarantee that the security of maritime operations. Everybody understands the importance of grain corridor for us country. Another block of matters is the expansion of list of services in payment of which the citizens are allowed to make payments in foreign currency for those citizens who require to be treated medically abroad, along with all the supplementary services related to rehabilitation in the medical institutions of foreign countries. And finally, it was allowed to pay for the services that are necessary to create proper conditions for study of the students abroad. So there are 4 categories of restrictions that were lifted, and we expect them to positively reflect on all spheres of activity of the banking system. Well, you've mentioned that economic indicators are way better than the forecasted ones. In your opinion, how solvable will Ukrainians be next year? And maybe let's talk about the solvency of the banks. Well, in brief, the next year will not be easy. Economy will require support from the banks. National Bank of Ukraine assessed the condition of the banking system, and we don't see any specific risks. The revenue of the banks allowed them to accumulate capital and to absorb war losses. Some of the banks will have to create plan of additional capitalization and restructuring, but there are no critical problems in the system. As I was mentioning before, the banks are ready to lend. We keep observing this trend, and on the other hand, the banks actively take part in support of the government programs. For example, during the war, under the program 579, the total amount of loans extended to the borrowers 161 billion hryvnias, and the total number of lenders was above 41,000. It's a very good indicator. And talking about the trust of the citizens to the banking system, it's growing. We see that the amount of term deposits is growing. They grew 30% in hryvnia, up to almost 250 billion hryvnia as of October this year. And talking about the foreign currency deposits, their amount is falling, but it's quite a reasonable trend in my opinion, because for the time being it's more beneficial to invest in hryvnia denominated instruments, like for example government bonds and bank deposits. In case it's necessary, we can elaborate on this topic. In September, for example, the corporate portfolio of the banks has grown comparing to, for example, December 21. Why December? Because the Great War really influenced negatively all the spheres of economy of our state, including the banking system. This is why the lending was also absent right after the 24th of February 2022. But now we see the corporate portfolio growing, so again a good trend here. And talking about economy and inflation, we were already mentioning that next year there will be about 5, or this year 5, and next year there will be 4% growth. And inflation for the next year, according to the estimates of the National Bank, it will be a little bit above 9%. But again, it's a forecast, and forecasts can be adjusted both ways. We hope that they will be adjusted to the best for our country. And talking about our citizens, we see that comparing to other countries, the level of borrowings in Ukraine is at about 4%. So there is a lot of space to develop and to grow. Also, we can mention that we have quite a high financial burden, the debt burden on the Ukrainians with lower income rate, which says that if we take a look at the structure of the loans of households, 2/3 of them are utility loans, which means that there is a lot of space for mortgage lending development that will again assist to the growth of our economy. So banking system in generally got the revenue of 122 billion hryvnias in this year. However, the share of NPLs is growing as well. They are at pretty high rate. However, for the time being, as of the October this year, the share is 37%, and within the last 2 months, the share of NPLs has fallen 10 billion hryvnias. So talking about the banking system in general, it's solvent, it's credit-worthy, stable. We see that the residual amounts in all currencies in the accounts in the banking system have grown 634 million hryvnias, which means that both businesses and citizens trust the banking system of Ukraine. Well, now that you've touched upon the issue of deposits and government bonds, let's talk about the savings of the citizens. In your opinion, how to better keep your savings, and what currency, what are the instruments that Ukrainians should use? Well, you know, the National Bank of Ukraine keeps talking a lot about the financial stability, about the stability of hryvnia, and if you're asking about my personal opinion, today very attractive are the assets denominated in Ukrainian hryvnia, I mean the financial assets. So first, the government bonds, the military bonds, and deposits with Ukrainian banks. Their rate is almost similar there. Well, it depends mostly on the amount and on term of if we talk about deposits, and talking about military bonds, it depends on the term of on the maturity of the bonds. So the yield for military bonds in some banks may reach 18% per annum, so this yield is way better. It's higher than the level of inflation, so you can basically make money here. Another advice is when people invest their funds, my advice is please to keep track of your investments. Don't put all the eggs in the same basket, because you can make some quick money, and in case you make any investments, you have to make sure that you have quick access to such money. And the list of investable products are again the same. It's the deposits, government bonds, military bonds denominated in hryvnia. So please remember that there is direct dependence between risk and interest. So if you are promised some interest at the level of 50 or 70% per annum, it's a very risky investment in the best case, but in the worst case, just a banal fraud. So please be cautious and trust the reliable financial institutions. Specifically, if we talk about the banks, I think that our banks are quite reliable. So during the war, the government guarantees 100% reimbursement of the bank deposits in case the bank crashes. And talking about military bonds, the reliability is 100%. Do we have any questions on the floor? Yes, Vladislav Obuch, Ukrinform. Next week there should be a meeting of the Monetary Committee of the National Bank that will discuss the discount rates. So how radical will be their decision? What will be the further strategies, since the board of NBU was stating that they will take a pause in terms of changing the discount rate after the December this year? And how this discount rate at the level of 16-15% correlate with those numbers that you've mentioned, like 6% of inflation and 20% of interest, or 20% interest of the deposit certificates of the National Bank of Ukraine, and also in terms of replenishment the budget and ability of Ukrainian economy to raise more loans. Thank you for your question. There are really a lot of discussions. If we look at the roots of your question, well, you were asking about the decision of the board. Well, the decision of the board on monetary policy, we will receive it by the end of this week, and we will be able to comment it. Since I'm a member of the board, I cannot influence their decisions. So again, there's a lot of discussions about the discount rate. If we say that the inflation will be maybe even less than 6% by the end of the year. So first of all, when the National Bank takes any decision in terms of monetary policy, the discount rate, you know, it's with the lag. In our realities, that lag may be like 10 to 15 months. So today's decision, if for example, National Bank takes this decision, you know, it doesn't take into effect right now, you know, the correlation mechanism, it doesn't come into effect right away. Well, it does influence, but it's aimed at creating this correlation, just as it works in the developed markets. In the developed markets, this transmission mechanism works faster than in our case. We still have to improve it. So under the conditions when the inflation forecast of the National Bank is at the level of 9.8%, plus we have an incredible level of liquidity of the banking system, that is yet another risk for National Bank. It's important to have those funds that today are mostly on demand funds, that they transform into term funds, and National Bank does a lot of this, and the discount rate is one of the levers of this mechanism to make sure that those deposit rates or the government bond rates remain at high levels, so people can sell them with as a liquid product, because it's important to maintain the financial stability for the National Bank, specifically during the war. When we hear that the discount rate should be close to inflation, well, look, it doesn't work like that today. Well, when some might say that at the lower discount rate, the banks were extending more loans to the economy. Well, it's true, but if we check out the structure of the discount rate, it has three components. What are the components? The monetary component, inflation, then another component is the risk, and the third component is the revenue the bank wants to get. So out of those three components, we see that inflation is something influenced by the discount rate. And talking about risk, even before the war we had a lot of questions to the way our lending was developing. Now the banks, if they don't lend money to the consumers, they say like it's a factor of war, the factor of protection of the owners. I mean, the Institute of Ownership. Well, can you hear me? Well, I apologize, I got a call here. Then there's a judicial system. So all those factors influence significantly the discount rate while lending. I have a graph here. Meanwhile, I'm talking. Let me demonstrate it to you. I don't know if it's gonna be visible. So it says that when we had 6% discount rate, the deposit and lending rates were not at the level of 6% too. Well, I cannot find it right away, but then I will be able to demonstrate it. But anyway, there may be other risks arriving, and it's important for us to work on them. we have to work with the legal environment to make sure that the risks are not so high at London, because the development of economy is cyclic, and the matter of high rates at London, you know, it was discussed by a lot of experts, but let's look at the essence of this issue. For example, in the Eastern Europe countries, there are high discount rates too. And we are being asked, why do we have this high discount rate? Because we have a mandate. We are responsible for price stability or inflation, then financial stability, stability of the banking system. And the third responsibility is the assistance to the economic growth. And for National Bank, it's important to ensure the fulfillment of all those three components. And talking about economy, it's also the responsibility of the government, and the government that does as well. We have does as well a lot to maintain the development of economy. We see all these programs like 579, and now even during the war, as I communicate with the banks, they say about the unequal rate. And banks keep saying that basically they agree with the strict and severe monetary policy of the National Bank of Ukraine. But the time will come when we have lower inflation, lower discount rate, when we don't have war. Like, for example, we're going towards the European Union, and then we will have the judicial system, the law enforcement system working just like in Europe, and this is when we're gonna have the discount rates just as low as they have in Europe. So this is in brief. Thank you very much, Mr. Vasyl, for your answers. I'm reminding you, we were talking about the financial stability with Vasyl Furman, Deputy Chairman of NBU, and we will be back on air at 13 o'clock, and we will talk about the plans for the next year and agricultural results of the year. Stay tuned.